Mary was 19 when her father gave her an impossible choice: leave the man she loved, or leave home forever. She stood there with her heart pounding, knowing that whatever she chose in that moment would change the rest of her life. And when she chose love, the door closed behind her with a finality she would never forget. In the England of the 1940s, love did not always look like poetry or soft music or happy endings. Sometimes it looked like stares in the street. Sometimes it looked like silence from family. Sometimes it looked like a young woman carrying one small suitcase, with nowhere certain to sleep, because she had fallen in love with a black man and refused to apologize for it. And yet, somehow, that love survived. Not for a season, not for a few dramatic years. It survived war, cruelty, loneliness, grief, poverty, rejection, and time itself. While the world changed around them, Mary and Jake stayed together. And that is what makes their story so powerful, because it was not built on fantasy. It was built on endurance. Mary was born in Britain. Jake was born in Trinidad. Their worlds were very different long before they ever met. And in those years, society made sure people like them understood exactly where they were supposed to stand. People believed races should not mix, families worried about shame more than happiness, and many couples were torn apart before they ever had a chance to begin. But then came the war. World War II changed everything and nothing at the same time. It moved people across oceans, placed strangers in unfamiliar towns, and forced lives to cross paths that otherwise never would have. Jake came to Britain during the war as part of the forces stationed near Burtonwood, close to Mary's home in Lancashire. That was where fate stepped in. Mary was taking typing and shorthand lessons at Technical College. Jake had been sent there for training by the Air Force. One day, he was there with a group of black friends when they called Mary and her friend over to talk. At first, the girls did not even know what to expect. They did not know whether the men spoke the same way they did. They did not know if the conversation would even last a minute. Then Jake began to talk. And for Mary, something shifted almost immediately. He did not try to impress her with swagger. He did not force charm. He simply spoke to her, and somewhere in that first conversation, he quoted Shakespeare. Mary loved Shakespeare, and hearing those words come from him surprised her in a way she never forgot. He was warm, intelligent, and steady. There was something about him that made the rest of the room seem less important. It started simply. A conversation, a spark, a feeling that maybe they had met someone who saw them clearly. But in those days, even being seen together could cause trouble. A few weeks later, Mary and Jake went on a picnic with friends. It should have been harmless. Young people outdoors, talking, laughing, trying to enjoy a brief escape from the heaviness of wartime. But someone spotted them. A woman cycling past saw two English girls with a group of black men, and that alone was enough to shock her. She reported Mary to her father. The consequences were immediate. Mary's father banned her from seeing Jake again. To him, this was not a small mistake or a passing friendship. It was disgrace. The idea that his daughter could be involved with a black man filled him with horror. For Mary, that was one of the first times love collided violently with the world around her. And still, the feelings did not disappear. Mary and Jake found each other again. They kept talking, kept feeling the pull that had started so naturally, but time was not on their side. When the war ended, Jake had to leave Britain and return to Trinidad. For many couples, that would have been the end. Different countries, different lives, different futures. No guarantee they would ever meet again. But separation only made their bond stronger. They wrote letters. Letter after letter crossed the ocean between them, carrying everything they could not say in person: longing, hope, doubt, memory. Every page was proof that what they had was real. And somewhere in that distance, Jake reached a decision. He did not want Mary to become a chapter from his past. He wanted her to become his life. So, a few years later, he came back to Britain. Then, almost out of nowhere, he asked her to marry him. Mary later remembered how sudden it felt. She was still only 19, young enough that most people would expect her to listen to her parents, play safe, and follow the path chosen for her. But love had already changed her. She knew what she felt. She knew what Jake meant to her. Then she told her father, and everything exploded. He told her that if she married Jake, she would never set foot in his house again. He was horrified that she could even consider marrying a black man. This was not just disapproval. It was rejection at its harshest and most personal. He was telling his daughter that love had a price, and the price was her family. Imagine being 19 and hearing that from your own father. Imagine knowing the people who raised you would rather lose you than accept the man you loved. Mary made her choice anyway. Her father threw her out. She left with just one small suitcase. No warm goodbye, no tearful support, no sudden change of heart. Just a young woman stepping into an uncertain future because she refused to betray the person she loved. In 1948, Mary and Jake were married at the register office. No family came. That detail says more than a long speech ever could. No parents smiling through tears. No relatives celebrating. No crowd. Just two people standing before the law, committing themselves to each other while the people who should have been closest to them stayed away. And that was only the beginning. The wedding did not magically solve anything. It did not silence society. It did not make people kinder. In fact, for a long time, marriage seemed to make their struggle harder. The first years they spent living in Birmingham were, in Mary's own words, hell. She cried every day. She barely ate. No one wanted to speak to them. They had trouble finding somewhere to live because landlords would not rent to a black man. Money was tight. Opportunity was limited. Even ordinary daily life became exhausting when it felt like the whole world was watching, judging, and quietly closing doors. People stared at them in the street. Some pointed. Some made it clear with just one expression that, to them, Mary and Jake were something offensive, something unnatural, something not to be tolerated. That kind of hostility wears people down. Not in one dramatic moment, but slowly, day after day. A look here, a comment there, a refusal, a cold shoulder. A reminder that your love, your home, your very existence together offends people who do not even know you. For Mary, the emotional cost was enormous. She had already lost her family's support. Now the outside world seemed determined to punish her for the same choice. For Jake, the pain was different, but just as deep. He had come to Britain and was met with abuse so casually cruel that it could make a person feel less than human. He later remembered how badly black people were treated in those days. Once, while he was on a bus, a man rubbed his hands on Jake's neck and said he wanted to see if the dirt would come off. It is difficult to hear something like that and not feel anger rise. That was the world they were living in. A world where a black man could be humiliated in public just for existing. A world where people thought it unsafe for a black man to work in an office around white women. A world where prejudice was not hidden in whispers, but spoken openly, proudly, as if cruelty were common sense. And in the middle of that ugliness, Mary and Jake were trying to build a life. Then came another heartbreak. Mary became pregnant, and for a moment perhaps they allowed themselves to hope that joy was finally on its way. But the child, a son, was stillborn at 8 months. The loss shattered her. She later said it was not caused by the stress she was under, but that hardly mattered to the pain. Grief does not measure itself neatly. It simply arrives and takes the air out of a room. After everything they had already endured, losing their baby was a blow almost too heavy to bear. And they never had any more children. That absence stayed with them. It is one thing to be rejected by the world. It is another to lose the family you dreamed of building inside that world. For many couples, that combination of pain might have broken the bond completely. But somehow, even in grief, they held on to each other. That may be the most remarkable part of their story. Not that they loved each other when it was easy. That they kept loving each other when life became unbearably hard. Little by little, life began to soften. Not all at once. Not enough to erase the past, but enough to let them breathe. Mary started working in education, and eventually became a deputy head teacher. Jake worked first in a factory and later for the post office. They slowly built stability with their own hands. No family fortune. No safety net. No easy welcome. Just persistence. They also began carefully to make friends. Even that came with tension. Mary sometimes felt she had to warn new people before inviting them over. She would tell them in advance that her husband was black, almost as if she needed to prepare them for something that should never have needed explanation. Think about how painful that is. Not knowing whether a friendship will survive the moment someone sees your front door open and your partner standing inside. Still, some people stayed. And over time, those people became their chosen circle. The kind of support they were denied by others, they slowly built for themselves. But one wound never healed fully. Mary's father. Years later, she and her father were reconciled in the sense that they were no longer completely estranged. The silence between them eased. The door that had once slammed shut was not entirely closed anymore. But even then, he never truly accepted Jake. He never approved. That quiet refusal remained to the end. He died when Mary was only 30. So even after all those years, she never got what many daughters hope for, to see the man they love finally welcomed by the man who raised them. There was no full healing there. No beautiful scene where old prejudice melted into understanding. Just the sad truth that some people run out of time before their hearts change. That part of the story matters too, because real life does not always tie every emotional thread into a neat bow. Sometimes love wins, but not in every direction. Sometimes two people build a beautiful life together while still carrying scars left by those who could not celebrate it. And yet Mary and Jake went on. Years turned into decades. The same couple that had once been stared at in the street went on to celebrate 70 years of marriage. 70. Just saying the number feels almost unreal. So many people had tried to make their relationship seem impossible, shameful, temporary, doomed. And still they stayed side by side, long enough to watch the world itself change. By then, the country around them was not the same country that had pushed them aside in the 1940s. Social attitudes had shifted. Interracial couples were far more accepted. The kind of open hatred they had endured no longer passed so easily without challenge. Younger generations grew up in a world very different from the one Mary and Jake had entered as newlyweds. Jake knew that better than anyone. He would sometimes say to young black people that they had no idea what it used to be like. That was not bitterness. It was memory. He had lived through a kind of daily humiliation that many people no longer had to imagine so vividly. His words were a reminder that progress did not appear by accident. It came because people like him endured what never should have been asked of them. And Mary, too, carried her own memories. Of being thrown out, of crying through the early years, of trying to smile through the cruelty of strangers, of losing a child, of building a marriage without approval, comfort, or ease. But when they looked back, what stood tallest was not the hatred around them. It was the fact that none of it had separated them. That is what gives this story its emotional force. Love did not protect them from suffering. Instead, it gave them a reason to keep going through the suffering. A reason to wake up and keep choosing each other even on the days when the outside world offered them nothing. In their later years, there was one more painful shadow on the horizon. Mary began to show signs of Alzheimer's. It was described as a slight form coming on, but even that is enough to change the atmosphere around a love story. Because when memory itself becomes fragile, every shared moment starts to matter even more. So they made the most of the time they had. That detail is quietly devastating. After surviving all they had survived, their final challenge was not public hatred or poverty or family rejection. It was time. The one thing no couple can defeat forever. They had beaten almost every other obstacle placed in front of them. But eventually, all love stories must face the reality that moments become precious precisely because they cannot be kept. And maybe that is why their story feels so moving. Because it is not just about an interracial couple who stayed together despite discrimination. It is about two people who chose each other when choosing each other cost them dearly. It is about a young woman walking out with one suitcase and no support. It is about a young man enduring daily abuse without letting it poison his love. It is about grief that could have destroyed them, and hardship that should have exhausted them, and years that somehow deepened what life kept trying to crush. Most people say love conquers all, as if it is a soft, pretty phrase. Mary and Jake proved that sometimes it is a brutal one, because real love is not just candlelight and promises. Sometimes it is hunger, sometimes it is rejection, sometimes it is burying a dream and waking up the next morning anyway. Sometimes it is standing beside someone when the whole world tells you not to. Sometimes it is surviving long enough to become living proof that the world was wrong about you. That is exactly what they became. A living answer to everyone who said they would not last. A living answer to everyone who thought prejudice was stronger than devotion. A living answer to a father who could not see beyond race, to landlords who shut doors, to strangers who stared, to a society that once treated their marriage as an offense. They lasted. They loved. And after more than 70 years, that love still remained. What makes Mary and Jake unforgettable is not just the cruelty they faced, it is the tenderness they protected in spite of it. Through war, separation, rejection, poverty, grief, and old age, they kept choosing the same simple thing. Each other. That is rare. That is powerful. And that is why their story still matters now. Because even in a changing world, it reminds us that some of the greatest acts of courage do not happen on battlefields or in headlines. Sometimes they happen quietly. In a register office with no family present. In a rented room no one wanted to give you. In a small house where two people decide that even if the world refuses to bless their love, they will live it anyway. Mary was thrown out for loving a black man. Decades later, she was still beside him. And in the end, that says everything.